Deputy President. I lead for the Labor opposition on the Jobs for New South Wales Bill 2015. The opposition will not be opposing the bill.
What?
Supporting jobs. Yes, we do support jobs. However, we will be moving some amendments which have been lodged with the clerks to try and improve the bill that is before us presently. There's a few things that need to be noted about the bill. The government, and I refer to the second reading contribution of the Minister in the other place, and I assume it's the same in the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary's speech. The government says that it established the Department of Industry, Skills and Regional Development to lead a bold policy agenda targeted at jobs creation, quote unquote. It's a matter of record that the Department of Trade and Industry was replaced by the Department of Industry, Skills and Regional Development. However, there's been no real flesh put on the bone of the industry part of the title of the department. And when you look at the remit to be given to this Jobs for New South Wales organisation and to its board, which I won't enumerate, it's quite clear that the government is seeking to outsource to this quango the policy formulation process of providing policy content. I acknowledge that interjection. So we think that is short-sighted. Career public servants in this newly created department should be charged with the task of developing the policy content if in fact the government is serious about growing jobs in this state. The Minister claims that since this government came to office, more than 250,000 new jobs were created in New South Wales. But bizarrely, they're pinning all their hopes on this new body to generate only 150,000 jobs in the next 4 years. So one wonders why, if they've been so successful without the assistance of Jobs for New South Wales, with this souped-up organisation, they're going to underperform. But in fact, the Bureau of Statistics provides a very different picture. If you look at the jobs picture across the whole of New South Wales since 2011, you can see that there's only a net 166,000 jobs created. If you look at the Greater Metropolitan Sydney region, you can see that there's only a net 132,000 jobs created. If you look at, well, this is significantly below the inflated claims made by the Minister and made by the government. If you look at regional New South Wales, there's less than 39,000 jobs created on your watch. Now, the statistics you've relied on in support of this legislation are suspect, but again I return to the point that if you were so successful without the support of this organisation, why do you, well, except you're promising to create less jobs than you've claimed to have created in the last 4 years. So I think the government is trying to soften people up for disappointment. If you look at the contributions, for example, if you look at the government's record in the past, and I refer to the contribution of my colleague Ryan Park MP, the Shadow Minister for the Illawarra and for Transport, he makes the point that only 2 years ago the $100 million Illawarra Infrastructure Fund was announced and projects were said to be approved, but to date very little of that money has actually been got out the door. So again, that's an underperformance by the government. You talk big, you make the announcement, but there is a delivery issue. I also want to acknowledge the contribution of Yasmin Catley MP in the other place, member for Swansea, and also David Harris, where they make the point that, again, this Jobs for New South Wales board and the fund it will have is in fact not a step forward but a step backwards. The Minister in his second reading speech says that the government, or this fund that will be overseen by the board, will boost the state's infrastructure attraction schemes to $190 million over 4 years. Now, that sounds impressive. But when you look at the 2015-16 budget, $32 million was allocated to the State Investment Attraction Scheme, and $22 million to the Regional Industries Investment Fund. Adding those figures together, the total funds available to regional areas is $54 million, and if you multiply that by 4, you get a figure of $216 million. So that was the existing schemes, $216 million over 4 years, but now the government recycles it, rebadges it with this new logo, Jobs for New South Wales, and hey presto, your $216 million over 4 years becomes $190 million over 4 years. A big reduction. And so the Jobs for New South Wales Fund is supposed to provide $190 million over 4 years, which is $47.5 million a year. And even if the full 30% said to be available to regional areas is only $14.25 million. The Regional Industries Investment Fund is $22 million for just this year. But so what you can see is that under this program, that if this legislation is enacted, regional New South Wales will be getting $7 million a year less than they would be receiving under the existing arrangements. It's taking money that was quarantined for the regions and opening it up to the whole state, but the government is saying this is a good for the regions and it's a step forward. And once again, the National Party, supposed to be the guarantor of the interests of the regions, has sold out to their city paymasters. Now, the fact is...
Point of order, Mr Deputy President.
Point of order,
Deputy President, I take offence at those comments. This member has a habit of making comments about the National Party, particularly even out of the House, and not even have the guts to take it up to us one-on-one in the House.
To the point of order, Mr Assistant
There's
President.
no point of order. The member will continue.
There is no point of order. That's okay, Duncan. I can talk for another 33 minutes if you want. The fact is that this government is trying to make out that this is an innovation, that it's providing more resources to the regions, but it is not. And of course, this is simply the stock and trade of this government, because we can see that it's of a piece with their actions, with TAFE, with massive cuts, particularly in regional areas. So the 9 regional directors engaged in the Department of Industry to facilitate business in regional areas will lose their power to make decisions about the allocation of grant money. People in the central organisation will now make those decisions and give the tick that regional managers will no longer be able to make. Business development managers in regional areas and those who travel around regional areas talking to businesses and working out ways to help people will have their authority taken away, and it'll all be centralised in the city. And I note that of the 7-person board, only one appointment will be made by the Regional Development Minister, and we can apprehend that only one of the 7 will have a regional focus. The Labor opposition will be at least one. We'll be seeking to increase that to at least 2 in our amendments. But what is quite clear is that this whole process is just about rebadging, throwing less money in and telling everyone what a great thing this is for regional New South Wales. And of course it simply is not. It simply is not. And the fact, so we will propose, we do propose some amendments. One is to improve the composition of the board, both as to gender, to have at least 3 of the 7 board members being women. We think there should be at least 2 persons who are ordinarily resident outside the metropolitan areas of Newcastle, Sydney and Wollongong. We think also that there should be at least 1 person with expert knowledge in disability employment, because engaging persons with disabilities in the world of work is an area that not only New South Wales but Australia lags behind the rest of the world in many respects. And we also want to ensure that the legislation has a greater regional focus, and we have amendments to address that. I do want to just address one other point. Well, just address one other point. A couple of the coalition members in the other place, Mr Kevin Anderson and Ms Katrina Hodgkinson, promoted the notion that the Jobs for New South Wales Fund will guarantee regional New South Wales at least 30% of the money in the fund, or of matters that are expended in the fund. However, when you look at the second reading speech of the Minister, and perhaps even more importantly, you look at the legislation, what you see is there is no guarantee that regional New South Wales will get any money. What you see in Clause 8, Clause 8(1)(b), which relates to the annual report, what must be reported on are particulars of the total amounts of payments made from the fund for job creation incentives, for proposals in rural and regional areas outside the metropolitan areas of Sydney, Wollongong and Newcastle, including whether that amount is at least 30% of total payments made from the fund. So it's simply saying whether you get to 30%. Doesn't guarantee it.
The government's announced it's its policy.
Well, I acknowledge that interjection, and we will see that, in which case, if it's the government's policy, the government will have no problem with opposition amendment number 4, which simply seeks to put a guarantee where the government's mouth is. If the government has a real intention, to deliver for regional New South Wales a minimum or at least 30% of the funds being dispersed, then the government will have no problem with the amendments proposed by the opposition, which simply does that. So we don't oppose the legislation. We will seek to improve it in some way, but it is simply a rebadging and recycling exercise where the government hopes that a new title, a new body, will distract people from the fact that there are less resources being invested for the benefit of rural and regional New South Wales. And we will not let up from drawing people's attention to that because we think it's important that there is some ground truthing in this area, because the government has talked a pretty tough game on delivering for regional New South Wales, but as I've indicated, it hasn't delivered and won't be delivering through this process unless they are really kept up to the mark. So I will I'll reserve my further comments for the committee stage.
The Honourable Reverend Fred Knight.